Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it. Alrighty, opener. Sherry is a style of fortified wine developed around 3,000 years ago in the Andalusia region of Spain, what is today southern Spain. For the next few minutes, I'll be outlining the growing environment, the grape growing, the winemaking practices, styles of sherry produced, and finally the wine laws and the wine business. Okay. Information for all four sections will be discussed. The information for all of the four sections that will be discussed will be sourced directly from the WSET Level 4 Diploma textbook and Fortified Wines edition 1.1, which was released in 2020 and is still relevant material for exams in October of 2023. Today is October 10th of 2023. Okay, timestamps will be available in the description for easy access to individual sections. You can thank me later, boys. Also, shout out Courage the Cowardly Dog right here. Whoop, whoop. Alrighty, without further ado, let's jump right into it. Overview. The production of sherry wines dates back to the time of the Phoenicians, roughly 3,000 years ago. Although we have little practical evidence of production from historical times, today sherry is a style of fortified wine made around the city of Jerez in the Andalusia region of what is today southern Spain. Okay, sherry was an extremely popular style up until the region was taken over by the Moors in the 800s, 800s to 1300s. The Moors were an Islamic group from the northern part of Africa that invaded and occupied the region for about 500 years. Because of their religious practices, alcohol consumption was heavily outlawed. However, vineyard development and wine production were still permissible. Kind of weird, kind of strange, but they were still permissible. All right. Fast forward to the mid 1300s, the region of Andalusia was once again governed under the rule of Christianity. During this period, both domestic consumption and exports grew rapidly. Wines were quickly gobbled up by the English, the Irish, and the Flemish. It was around this time that Christopher Columbus had discovered America, allegedly. And wines quickly flooded the early colonies of the New World. During this time, production and consumption flourished. There were some hiccups in the form of the Peninsular Wars, phylloxera, and the spread of both powdery and downy mildew. Several successful shipping businesses continued to establish themselves. However, the hiccups were not a very big deal. Due to the overwhelming popular nature of sherry, many countries attempted to recreate their own styles of sherry, so there was a lot of imitation in the market. Many of these reproductions were often very low quality, and soon there was an overabundance of cheap and inferior knockoffs flooding the market. As a result, in 1933, the Andalusian producers formed what is today the Consejo Regulador, a regulatory council that was charged with setting regulations to control the production and the trading of sherry wines. Whole lot of the word production used there. I apologize. The creation of the Consejo Regulador was successful, and quality production began to rise and to develop. Sherry sales reached their peak in 1979 with 1.5 million hectoliters produced and sold. This figure only continued to drop in the last 50 years. So the sherry market is declining rapidly, guys. Okay. To this day, Consejo Regulador continues to and attempts to promote the balance of vineyard plantings, stock levels, and sales of all sherry wines. Okay. Section 1, that was kind of the overview section. So section 1 is the growing environment and grape growing. Okay. Sherries are made in the region of Andalusia. I'm going to say that 50,000 times so that you pass this exam. Sherries are made in the region of Andalusia in southwestern Spain in what is loosely called the Sherry Triangle, or known more technically as the Zona de Producción or Marco de Jerez. Okay. These are all synonyms for the same thing. The majority of plantings exist. The growing region is comprised of a total of 7,000 hectares of regulated growing area. So the growing region, The majority of plantings exist in very low elevation, from 0 to 90 meters above sea level. The region's climate is listed as hot Mediterranean climate with hot, dry summers and mild, relatively rainy winters. There are two major wind systems that are incredibly important to the region. They both help or hinder production in a major way. The first of the two wind systems is called Poniente. Pardon me if I incorrectly pronounce that. Poniente. Poniente, that is a cooling, damp wind that blows in from the Atlantic Ocean, helps to kind of mitigate some of that heat that comes into the region. This helps to cool down vines during the summer, but does increase the level of dampness and humidity in the vineyards, which of course, if you're at the level 4, you already know that's going to be some disease pressure, mildew, mold, stuff like that. But helps to cool down the vines. The second wind system is called the Levante, 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 a hot and dry wind blowing in from northern Africa, which creates hot, arid conditions. Okay, so kind of the polar opposite of that. The major city of production, Jerez, Jerez, looks like G-Rez, it's Jerez is how it's pronounced, typically has a very sunny, high UV pressure daytime, with very low cloud cover. This allows grapes to ripen easily, but if the canopy isn't managed correctly, grapes can develop sunburn, and we don't want that. That's TDN, 2,4,6 tetra, whatever the fuck. There are two approved DOs for sherry production. DO Jerez Sherry, Jerez -HXERES Jerez Sherry, and Dio Manzanilla from Sanlúcar de Barrameda, one of the 3 towns. We'll get into that later. Although there is an established growing region for many types of sherry, there is one major exception in the form of Pedro Jimenez. PX is that how I'm going to refer to that for the rest of this video. This grape can legally be grown outside of the Sherry Triangle in the region of Montilla, as in like Montilla Morales, which is kind of close to Malaga. Montilla region, and can be grown and dried outside of the Sherry Triangle. However, all production and maturation and bottling must take place within the approved Zona de Producción. The Zona de Production is split into 2 major regions. That is Jerez Superior, and then just the Jerez Zona. 90% of plantings are coming from the Zona, from the Jerez Superior, and mostly from the Palomino grape. We'll elaborate on that in a little bit. So 90% of production is coming from Jerez Superior. Jerez Zona is the rest of the 10%, which has kind of separate soils and planting styles, and we'll get into that as we go. The subregions of sherry are broken down into what are colloquially referred to as pagos. Okay, pagos, kind of think of them as like AVAs, like sub-AVAs. So you have Napa Valley, think of like Carneros and think of them as like Oakville, Yountville, Calistoga. Sipping on a little Amontillado right now. Oh, baby. Subregions of sherry are broken down into what is colloquially referred to as pagos. Okay, these are small but distinct regions within the Zona de Producción. Think of them as like sub-AVAs of Napa Valley or Bordeaux. Certain pagos are known for higher quality plantings, think Oakville, while others are considered for mid-level or everyday drinking, think Stag's Leap District. I don't know. Shots fired. Finally, soils. There are 3 main types of soils in the Zona de Producción. The most important by far is Albaritza. Okay, the other 2 are Barros, maybe is probably how you pronounce that, and Arenas or Arenas. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but Albaritza is a mixture of soil. It's a soil composite. Pardon me. It's a mix of limestone, silica, and clay. Alboritza has very high concentration of calcium bicarbonate it's coming from the limestone. All limestone soils have that. This creates a very chalky and flinty consistency to the soil. Little is said in the textbook about the silica, but the majority of the emphasis on the composition is its clay composite. Okay, clay content. Pardon me. A lot of alliteration there. The clay in Alboritza allows for water retention, which is incredibly important since Jerez is an extremely hot and arid region. Okay, the hot clay forms a strong crust on the Earth's surface, which lowers, the evaporation rate of the moisture of the soil. This ability to retain water allows for high density plantings of Palomino grapes, which does not require high concentration of flavors. Okay, and we'll elaborate on that in a little bit. But making the soil composition perfect for the varietal planted. Okay, the light color of Alboritza also helps to allow for UV rays to reflect off the surface and aid ripening to the undercarriage of the vine's canopy. Okay, the other two soil compositions are briefly mentioned. They are Barros, which is just as it has a higher clay component, and then Arenas, which is the more sandy soil. Okay, grape varietals. Palomino, also known as Palomino Fino, or Listan Fino, as in Listan Prieto, but Listan Fino is also what it's referred to as. This is the principal grape varietal used. 99% of, just under 99% of production in this region is the Palomino grape, guys. This is the workhorse grape. No pun intended. Palomino is the name of a white horse. This is a white wine. Easy to think of it as a white horse, workhorse grape. All right, right around 99%. It is mid to late ripening grape, which makes it well suited to dry and sunny weather, capable of producing large yields. The grape does lose acidity quickly after it reaches maturity. Palomino is a neutral varietal and therefore does not tend to add much of its own primary flavors to sherry wines. Okay, most of the flavor is going to be coming from either biological or oxidative aging. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. Muscatel, also known as Muscat of Alexandria, not Muscat Blanc à Petit Grain. That is for port production when we get there. Muscatel, also known as Muscat of Alexandria. This varietal accounts for less than 1% of all production by volume, typically planted on the sandy arenas soils. Muscatel is also a late ripening grape and well adapted to heat and drought resistance. So in contrast to the Palomino, Muscatel is an aromatic grape, giving aromas such as grape and blossom, that grapey flavor that you associate with Muscat. And is generally used to produce sweet fortified wines of the same name. Pedro Jimenez would be the last and third varietal, also referred to from now on as PX. PX is also used for sweet fortified wines, and it's also used as a sweetening agent for further sherries. Okay, both I believe can be, but typically you're going to see PX sherry used to be a sweetening agent for there's naturally sweetened wines and there's kind of artificially sweetened wines. We'll talk about that in a minute. PX is also used for sweet fortified wines and used as a sweetening agent. It's small. Thin-skinned grapes tend to accumulate high levels of sugar and are traditionally dried in the sun for further concentration of its sugars. It is a neutral varietal, and therefore its flavors come from the drying and maturation process. Okay, legislation permits for PX to be grown in Montilla, we talked about that earlier, and shipped either fresh or dried to the zona de producción. PX also represents less than 1% of the production in the region. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Vineyard management. Modern day Palomino production is evolving to accommodate mechanization. Today, 60% of all vineyards are pruned, managed, and harvested mechanically. Many developers are employing the use of single or double cordon training with vertical shoot position. Max yields permitted by legislation are 80 hectoliters per hectare. And that's That's the max yield. However, typically you're going to see 60 to 70 hectoliters per hectare. Okay, that's going to be kind of the more reasonable amount that people would harvest throughout the year. Pardon me. Okay. Most sites are planted in gentle slopes of 10 to 15 degrees. And because of this, so really gentle slopes like this, 10 to 15 degrees, okay? Because of this, the soil is tilled and worked to form troughs or gullies that allow each row of vines to catch rainwater during the winter, all right? This allows water to collect and to permeate that hard crust of the Alboritza soil, as opposed to kind of just trickling down the slopes and just collecting at the bottom. This system is called acerpia. Think like serpent. Think like troughs and gullies, thin troughs, like a serpent maybe. All right, this practice is done by, used to be done by hand labor and now is mostly done with mech, okay? The region employs the use of rootstocks that are both limestone resistant and drought resistant. So chlorosis commonly occurs when you have a lot of limestone, calcium bicarbonate. Chlorosis makes the plant sick. So you want a rootstock that can help you with that, okay? So that's going to be a Vitis vinifera rootstock. And then it's also drought resistant. That's going to be Vitis berlandieri, which, if I remember back to community college, is most likely indigenous to Texas, good old Texas hill country. And this is going to give you your drought resistance together. And this is there's a couple different rootstocks that have really ridiculous names. They're in the book. I'm not going to mention them. Because it's fucking ridiculous, and don't worry about putting that. But just know that it's a combo of Vitis vinifera and Vitis berlandieri, one American rootstock, one European rootstock, and it was developed there locally, and it's like 1XX49 stupid, something like that. Don't worry about that. Finally, the European grape moth is still a significant source of issues in the region. However, the textbook doesn't go much further into listing it as a threat. So just know European grape moth. Pretty much fucks everything up in Europe. Harvest typically starts in the first week of August and lasts until the end of September. Vineyards further inland will be harvested first, and then because they tend to be warmer and more continental, you will then continue to harvest, and the last sites will typically be harvested closest to the coast. They tend to have cooler, slower maturation caused by their proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. Grapes tend to be harvested earlier rather than later, as Palomino can be negatively affected by early fall rains coming in off the Atlantic Ocean. Grapes only require 12% alcohol by volume to be harvested, and an effective harvest will include the total or titratable acidity being above 5 grams per liter of acid. So, however, acidification is approved. Palomino acid levels drop very quickly after they reach ripeness. Pardon me, a little bit more wine. All right. The final grapes to be harvested are the Moscatel and the PX. Both are later ripening and require significant amount of sugar accumulation to manage their high final sugar levels. Okay, that's pretty standard. Winemaking. Let's get into the winemaking. All right. Grapes are received into the winery and are pressed instantly. Okay. Skin contact is bad for the development of floor yeast. So quick pressing and processing is paramount. Free run or first press juice will amount to 60 to 75% of the total yield. This will typically be used for the higher quality or lighter style sherries, guys. I didn't mention in my notes here what they do with the other 30, 40, 25%. I'm guessing those are typically going to be used to make the more oxidative style. And we'll get to that in the next section, but the really fresh, lighter styles, those are typically used for biological aging. We'll get to that, promise. All must will be clarified before the fermentation. Okay, that's important because Alboritza soils have very high chalk content, which throws like dust and chalk particles all throughout the grape must. You want to clarify that out. So all wines, all Palomino wines, 99% of wines will be fortified before, excuse me, will be, pardon me, clarified before alcoholic fermentation. So once the must is clarified, it's commonly split into once the must is clarified, it is commonly split into separate fermentation lots, depending on which vineyard sites or pagos the initial grapes were sourced from, pardon me. These different base wines can be used as for further blending or kept separately. So they ferment different lots separately, and then they can blend them back up later if they want to, or they can kind of keep them as like single pago wines. Although I don't think legally you can label a wine as a single pago. I think they're working on that. It says that in the book, but I don't know if you can legally label a single pago as per today. Maybe in the future. Sherry fermentation. And the sherry fermentations are typically induced with cultured yeasts, and batches ferment at moderate temperatures in the low 70. I believe it says 71 to 74 in the book, but just say low 70s. You'll get the points for that. Most lots are fermented in stainless steel tanks. However, some older and or premium producers will use old oak barrels in an attempt to add slightly higher body to the initial ferments. Okay. New oak aging is not pretty much everything in the fortification world, in this entire whole, not section, but this entire whole book, the whole textbook. New French oak is not, they're not interested in that. Almost don't take that as a certain, but if you're guessing, don't fucking put new French oak aging. You want used French oak aging for this whole entire section. All right. Malolactic fermentation is blocked for sherry production. Okay, that's really important. We don't want malolactic characteristics. We can't do an SO2 addition for that. Okay, so when we're blocking MLF, it's very common to do sulfur additions. We don't do a sulfur addition here, sulfur dioxide. That will kill the floor yeast that we will get into in a minute. So what you're going to do is you're going to chill the must below 50 degrees for a number of days. Chill the must below 50 degrees for several days until all malolactic culture has been eradicated. Yes. Classifications. Okay, this is important. All right, you might get there's a good chance you'll get a question on this. Okay, there's two classifications that happen throughout a sherry's life cycle. One is right after they've been fermented, the base wine has been fermented and fortified. Pardon me. The first classification is right after the wine has been fermented. It hasn't undergone fortification yet. The first classification will destine it for its fortification level. So the first classification is right after the base wine has been finished, but before it's been fermented or it's been fortified. The second classification is after it's sat in the sobretables, and we will get to that. But those are the two classifications that you need to know. Okay, just after fermentation and after sobretables aging. That's the waiting room. We'll get to that. Remember the waiting room. It's kind of confusing, but those are the two classifications. So we're going to get right into the first classification. I'll go more in depth. The first classification takes place upon the completion of the initial fermentation. Individual lots will be assessed by their body, their character, and their intensity of flavors. Wines with lighter body and less flavor intensity will be destined for biological aging. We'll get into all this in a minute, I promise. But wines with lighter body and less flavor will be destined for biological aging. Wines with fuller body and greater flavor intensity will be destined for oxidative aging. And we'll get into all that, I promise. Wines designated for biological aging will then be fortified with a 95% grape spirit to levels of 15 to 15.5. That is important, extremely important. Pardon me. It's extremely important. And you'll definitely have to talk about that on the exam. So this will allow the development of floor yeast and thus allow biological aging to take place. We will get into that later, I promise. The final wine will be either Fino or Manzanilla unless it's switched into a hybrid style. Wines designated for oxidative aging will then be fortified with the same 95% grape spirit to an ABV of 17%. This hinders the development of flora yeast and allows the wine to age in an oxidative setting. And we'll talk all about that. Once this first classification is complete, wines will be then entered to this thing called the sobretablas, S-O-B-R-E-T-A-B-L-A-S, sobretablas. I like to think of the sobretablas as a sort of waiting room. Okay, it's this waiting room. The wines will sit there for a couple months. The wines will sit in the sobretablas for several months, where biologically aged wines will develop a layer of flor, and oxidative wines will start their oxidative aging process. And after a few months, the second classification takes place. Okay, so we just talked about the second classification a little bit a second ago, but let's go more into it. Second classification, wines have either developed a full layer of flor and still retain light and fresh flavors. Those will be placed into either a fino or manzanilla solera, and we will get into solera in a second, while the sobretables that has not developed the required amount of flor will be evolved into a more flavorful, or pardon me, all right. Wines that have developed a full layer of flor and still retain light and fresh flavors will be placed in either a fino or manzanilla solera. While sobretables that has either not developed or required, that's incorrect, pardon me. Let's say, while wines that have either not developed the required amount of flor or have not evolved into more, or wines that are lighter are going to go into fino and manzanilla style sherries. Wines that are heavier are going to be switched, and they will be Wines that have developed a full layer of flor and still retain light and fresh flavors will be placed in either a fino or manzanilla solera. Okay, the ones that have a little bit heavier flavor and aroma, those will be transferred to what's called an amontillado or palo cortado style. And then they'll enter those, and we'll talk about those later. Those are hybrid styles. So lighter stuff goes into fino and manzanilla. The heavier stuff will go into amontillado and palo cortado. They will end up switching to the oxidative style. It's during the second classification. All right. Maturation. All maturation for sherry wine must take place in the sherry triangle, also known as the zona de producción. The three main towns that form the sherry triangle are Jerez, Puerto de Santa Maria, and Sanlúcar de Barrameda. Okay, these are the three major towns. Sherry triangle, actually, that word is not listed in the WSET diploma. However, the Court of Master Sommeliers does use that word quite a lot, so I use it sometimes. Wines are matured in bodegas. Okay, these are designed to create and maintain specific environments for long-term aging and Solera storage. Bodegas are purpose-built with thick walls to keep temperatures consistent, high ceilings to allow the hot Andalusian air to kind of rise and exit through the windows that are placed really high up, which allows the hot air to escape and the coastal winds to kind of enter and cool the bodega down a little bit. Finally, bodegas employ the use of earthen floors, okay? And they kind of just hose down or like wet down these floors, and that kind of will just chill out it'll cool the entire bodega. It will also, I'm sure, add a little bit more humidity. You do need about 65+% humidity to age wine for Solera aging. So, all right, let's talk about the Solera system. I've mentioned this already. You should definitely know a little bit about this, but we're going to go level 4 into this. Most sherries are non-vintage, okay? The Solera system is a concept, the Solera system as a concept creates a wine by the use of what's called fractional blending. It's only listed once in the book. However, that is the most important thing to say about what a sherry wine is. Sherry wines are made from a system of fractional blending, the Criadera to the Solera system. And we will get into that right now, okay? Individual sections of a Solera are broken down into what is called Criadera. These can be as few as 3, 4 levels of Criadera. It can be as many as 15, 20, a lot of crazy old Criadera Solera systems out there, many Criadera long. The oldest level of the Criadera system is called, and this is very confusing, is called the Solera level, okay? So think of it as a pyramid. You have new stuff entering at the top, and then that's trickling down. Every single level of Criadera you have, from the 10th to the 9th to the 8th to the 7th, all the way down to the first Criadera, which would be the oldest Criadera. And then below that, the final oldest, most mature lot in the entire pyramid is called the Solera level, but that's also the name of the entire system. Okay, so it is confusing, but it goes oldest as in oldest level is the Solera level. Then your second oldest is the first Criadera, then the second Criadera, third Criadera, fourth Criadera. So the lower number the Criadera, the older it is. The higher number, the closer it is to the Sobrietables. And we'll get to that in a second because it does get fucking confusing. Let's see. I think I just did all that right there. Each Criadera level is older than the level above it. The newest wine will be added to the Criadera system by way of this Sobrietables. So once, you have that second classification that's coming straight out of the Sobrietables, once it gets classified, hey, you're a Fino sherry, that wine goes from the Sobrietables into the Fino Criadera, the biggest number in that Criadera, say it's a 10 Criadera system. You'll pull wine out of the bottom, and then you'll funnel wine down. No more than 40% of a Solera system can be bottled in a single year, which is important. So they don't allow you to just fucking start dumping shit. Only 40% of an entire Solera system can be bottled in a single year. The Solera system can be no younger than 2 years old before you bottle it. So no new shit, no new friends, okay? When bottling, it is possible to bottle any wine from any Criadera level, given that it is at least 2 years old. So that's another interesting thing. So you typically associate, when you're thinking about this shit, you're thinking, oh, they just pull it off the bottom level and then they just keep trickling everything down, fractional blending. No, you can take wine from the third and the fourth Criadera and then bottle that separately. And then you can have the bottom Solera level, bottle that separately. You can also blend Solera level, bottom level with the fourth level and the sixth level and get a flavor profile there. And you might take a bunch from the fourth and only a little bit from the bottom and a little bit from the bigger number Solera, Criadera. So you can mix and match all this different shit. Doesn't matter what the fuck you do, as long as you don't take 40% of the Solera system out, at more than 40% out. Okay. Finally, wines undergo biological aging. Again, aging for Fino or Monsignor sherry can also be added to the blend. Okay. Oh yeah. Pardon me. All right. So you can pull wines from any level of the Criadera. However, at this point, when you're going to start pulling stuff for bottling or for final blending, you can also pull Fino and Monsignor sherry, and you can put it into the Amontillado Solera, and we'll get to that. That's more of the hybrid style later, but you can, that would be the time when you would pull stuff out of biological aging and put it into oxidative aging. All right. And let's really talk about what biological aging is. So biological aging simply refers to wines developing under a layer of flor. Flor is a matte layer floating above the liquid in a barrel. The layer of flor is comprised of 4 separate strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae developing together in a thick mat. For flor yeast to develop, wine must have a minimum AVB of 15.5. Okay, anything above that, you're going to kill the flor yeast. So it has to be no higher than 15.5 alcohol by volume. No added sulfur dioxide. And it also has to have an unconventional amount of oxygen in the barrel because it needs oxygen to survive. Okay. Because of this, barrels for biologically aged wine will only be filled up to about 85% of the total barrel. Okay. The bungs will also be placed very loosely on the bung holes. Ho, 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 bung hole, which allows slight oxygen ingress and egress over time. Finally, temperatures in the cellar must remain in the mid 60s Fahrenheit, with relative humidity around 65%. Okay, and let's talk about what the effects of floor are on the final wine. So the layer of floor protects the wine from oxidation. That's very important. So it's like a thick mat of yeast, and it totally protects all the wine under there from oxidation. Okay. The floor will consume alcohol and transmute it into acetaldehyde. This is extremely important. This is what gives biologically aged wines their telltale aromas of apple, hay, and chamomile. All right. Those are important tasting notes. If you smell biological aging, which you should be able to pretty fucking easily, you want to write those down. Apple, hay, chamomile, nuts. We'll go into that later. There's a whole list I have of stuff. Consumes glycerol, giving Finos and Manzanilla sherries an exceptionally and unmistakably lean and sharp body profile. These wines are super fucking lean, guys, and super crisp. All right. Reduces the level of acetic acid, that's vinegar, adding some microbiological stability to the final product. Over time, floor dies and regrows. Dead floor will then precipitate out of the solution. It'll drop to the bottom, giving the wine an autolytic character, autolysis, lees aging. For you guys all know this by now. Young wine entering the Solera by way of the sobretables includes fresh nutrients to the layer of floor, allowing it to grow exponentially. So yeast will die. Yeast will come into this, wine will come into the sobretables, and that will allow that mat to just keep generating, hopefully, for decades. So, all wines aged biologically are purpose built to be drunk now. That's very important. Not suitable for further aging. Drink now, not suitable for further aging. They already did the aging for you. Just drink the shit. Okay. That's going to be on your exam. That's your last question for, if you have a sherry, not suitable for aging. Okay. Oxidative aging, very different. During oxidative aging, color will change from lemon to gold, then to amber, then to brown as the wine gets older. All right. Alcohol will slowly increase due to water evaporating out of solution. This causes other aspects of the wine, such as the aroma and the flavor, to concentrate. Unlike biologically aged wines, glycerol will actually slowly rise, giving oxidative wines kind of a fuller body. Through oxidation, the wines will take on heavy tertiary components such as caramel, toffee, nuts. Finally, ethyl and acetic acids will rise slightly, leading to higher levels of microbiological instability. So it's a little bit more chaotic for oxidative aging. And then we're going to go into finishing and packaging. All sherries are tartrate stabilized. Okay, that's kind of like cold soaking, fined and filtered. So they want to destroy that floor yeast, get it out of there if there is any. Wines can be bottled under either cork or screw cap. The wine I have tonight is bottled under screw cap. That is Mestro Sierra. Can you see that? Get that out of my face. Yeah. Bottled under screw cap. Great wine, $30, 12 years. It's an aged indicated Amontillado, and we'll talk about that later. And all wines, when we talk about finishing and packaging, all wines must be bottled within that sherry triangle. Okay, here we go. This is a big one. Styles of sherry. We're going to get through this. We're going to do this, baby. We only have a couple more minutes, okay? Styles of sherry. We're going to start with dry sherries. There are two dry sherries, okay? There are Fino and Manzanilla, okay? They're very similar. The only difference is that one has to, by law, be made in Sanlúcar de Barrameda. That's Manzanilla. D.O. Manzanilla, Sanlúcar de Barrameda. That is, excuse me, the only Manzanilla there is. Everything else is Fino, okay? Both wines have spent their entire life under floor. All right, they're typically pale lemon in color, They are dry wines. They're not medium, they're not sweet, they're not off dry, they're dry wines. They are light to medium body. They contain low acid levels. It's important that you put that. They also have low alcohol for the fortified category in the WSET. So these are 15, 15.5. That is the lowest you can possibly get. Always make sure you put low for fortified. Okay. Primary aromas, and I mentioned this earlier. So acetaldehyde aromas over primary fruit aromas. So when you have something with biological aging, the first thing I want you to do is a cheat sheet right here. Write down, hey, yellow apple skin, chamomile, bread dough, almonds, nuts, saline, sea spray, flint. You can write any of those, any combination of those. If you get a little bit of citrus, like, oh, there's a little bit of like lemon zest on here, or like tangerine zest, or like bergamot or something like that. You can put that if you want. Write down the shit that it says in the book. You're never wrong. You're literally never wrong. You can challenge that if they say it wrong. So Manzanilla wines tend to be lighter and have and be a little bit more fresher than finos, with more emphasis on the salt or sea spray flavors. Those are made right on the coast. San Lucar de Maromeda is right on the coast. So there's this kind of ideology that if you're blind tasting and you have something that's a little bit more saline, a little bit more sea salty, has a little bit of that sea spray flavor, it might be a Manzanilla. Honestly, it's pretty damn close. You're going to get pretty good points if you say biologically aged, either Fino or Manzanilla. All right. Last thing is Manzanilla also requires more replenishment of fresh wine from the sobretables. So Manzanilla wines will typically be bottled in 375. So half little bottles like this. Okay. And that is because the Manzanilla floor requires a little bit more refreshment. Okay, so smaller bottlings. There's a sub bottling here called Manzanilla Pasada, which I've never seen before. Manzanilla wines that have also undergone a small little bit of oxidative aging. Kind of tastes similar to an Amontillado. This is what I really warning. The next kind of stuff, we're going to get straight into hybrid styles. This is why I hate sherry. There's a lot of bullshit, a lot of politics here when we get into Palo Cortado, Manzanilla Pasada. This stuff is very confusing to a lot of people, especially if you're first learning this region, because there's so much crossover. And I highly suggest you just write Amontillado if you get what you think is an Amontillado wine or a Palo Cortado wine, because there's very little information. The book even literally says that it's confusing. So, yeah, which is fucked. All right, hybrid styles. First style, there's two, Amontillado and Palo Cortado. And we will talk about Amontillado first, okay? These are wines that have undergone a period of biological aging as well as a period of oxidative aging, okay? Wines have typically started as Fino, and then they're fortified to 17% like an Oloroso that kills the floor yeast, and then it gives it more of an oxidative style, okay? And then these wines are typically very good to outstanding. So they start as Fino, then move into Oloroso. The final one is Palo Cortado, and this is where it gets confusing. It has aromas of Amontillado, but a body of Oloroso. So kind of like the best of both worlds. It's somewhere between 17 and 22% ABV. If they give this to you on an exam, it's kind of a dick move. I don't think they're going to, but I think they want you to know about it. But whatever. Initial wine must age Fino for 5 years. Okay, so you're going to start with a minimum 5-year aged Fino. And Fino wines that develop heavier flavors and aromas will then be placed into the Palo Cortado system, thus giving them some aging. It's basically the same thing as Amontillado, but just the flavor is a little different, the final flavor. Let's get into oxidative style. That is Oloroso. That is Oloroso is 100% oxidative, so no floor yeast at all. It gets, instead of, in the first classification, instead of going from 15 to 15.5% alcohol by volume, it automatically gets fully fermented and then fortified to 17% alcohol by volume. The wine is typically very brown in color, There is an emphasis on heavy tertiary components, and there are wines are produced for Oloroso sherries at all quality and price levels. So there's cheap shit, expensive shit, good shit, bad shit, amazing shit, outstanding shit. If you see a wine labeled as Enrama, Enrama, that kind of just generally refers to as raw in Spanish. Raw is what that translates to, pardon me, on a wine. That means it's either been lightly filtered or fully unfiltered. So these things can be in many different categories. So if you see Enrama, it just means filtered or unfiltered or slightly filtered. Okay. Let's finish it up. We're almost done. Naturally sweetened wines. Okay. Once harvested, grapes for naturally sweetened wines are laid out for 2 to 3 weeks in the sun, which allows the water to evaporate and flavors to concentrate and aromas of raisins to develop. So we're talking about PX and Muscatel. We harvest these grapes, we lay them out in the sun for 2 to 3 weeks, and they lose a shit ton of water and they raisinate. Okay. That's going to give you raisin flavor, but it's also going to give you the kind of those dried, berry flavors. So once wines are fermented, the high sugar levels will naturally arrest fermentation. So you're using raisins to make wine, you'll ferment them. They will hit 4 to 6% ABV, which naturally the sugar will kill that. It can't really get higher than that. Once the base wine alcohol is achieved at 4 to 6%, they will then be fortified straight to 15 to 16%, and then matured oxidatively in Soleras, which will further evaporate and concentrate the final wine. But all that sugar that's left over from just fermenting it to 4 to 6%, that becomes your RS. And in PX and Muscatel, those levels are fucking insane. So grapes used for sweetened style of sherry are PX and Muscatel. PX sherry has a final residual sugar level minimum of 212, which is very minimum. Usually these wines are somewhere between 450 to 550 grams per liter of residual sugar. 450 to 550, that's fucking high as shit. Okay, Muscatel wines have a very minimal level of 160. That is the minimum residual sugar that you can have. But typically there's somewhere between 250 to 375 grams per liter of residual sugar. So Muscatel, more aromatic, but very sweet, but not nearly as sweet as PX sherries. Okay, both of these grapes can be used to blend into artificially sweet wines. So you can make those two styles of wine, and then you can also just keep those berries, and then you are going to blend into wines that we are going to make sweet, not naturally sweet. We are going to make them sweet. Okay. Now, and we'll get into those, but unnaturally sweet wines, or what I think we just call sweetened wines, these are wines that are made from Palomino grape, fermented dry, fortified, aged. So basically just made like a normal wine, normal fortified wine. However, at the end, we add a sweetening agent, which is either RCGM, PX, or Muscatel. We'll get into that by the individual bottlings. High quality sweetened wines will then undergo further aging in a barrel. So once you've sweetened them, you will then age them for a longer period of time. That's when we'll get into like VOS, VORS, and we'll talk about that later. But just know that expensive shit gets aged even longer than that, okay? So let's get into the first one. The first one is the lowest quality. That is pale cream sherry. Biological aging prior to sweetening. We are sweetening this with rectified concentrated grape must. That is RCGM, ladies and gentlemen. You should know what that is by now. Subtle floor characteristics. Medium sweet to sweet, so it's pretty dang sweet, but not crazy. It's typically acceptable to good and quality level, and that's your pale cream sherry. All right, the next one is medium and cream sherry. These are two different styles: medium sherry and cream sherry. Medium sherries will have flavors of biological and oxidative. Kind of think of them like Amontillado a little bit, and then the cream sherry will just have the oxidative flavors. Really strangely good stuff, the cream sherries. Both are blended with PX, with Pedro Jimenez. They're not RCGM. These are PX wines. So that's how they get their sweetness. They're typically good to very good. Age indicators. Oh, pardon me. Typically good to very good. So those are your three: pale cream, medium, and cream sherries. Those are sweetened, artificially sweetened. I'm doing that to this wine. It's not naturally sweet. They're Palomino grapes, fermented dry, fortified, aged, and then sweetened later. Okay. Let's get into age indicated sherries. All right. All wines for age indicated sherries. Anytime you have an age indication, all wines must undergo testing and laboratory analysis. They literally do fucking carbon 14 dating on the wine. So, and this is all done by the Consejo Regulador. The only approved styles for age indicators are Amontillado, Palo Cortado, and PX sherry. So think like oxidative plus styles. Okay. I think Oloroso's in that too. I totally might have missed that. But for sure, Amontillado, Palo Cortado, and PX sherries. All right. VOS and VORS. Okay. These are two long age indicators. VOS stands for very old sherry, wines that have a flavor profile of an average of 20 years. Okay. So, remember, fractional blending, so there's no exact way to age the wine. However, I guess if you carbon date it, you could have maybe an exact age. But yeah, it's an average age of 20 years. That's a VOS. And then the second one is a VORS. That is wines that have a flavor profile of an average of 30 years. Okay. These are the premium to super premium wines. Okay. These are probably going to be the biggest baller wines in sherry production. Below that, you have 12 and 15-year-old sherries, slightly lower age than VOS and VORS, but they are age indicated. Here you have a perfect example of, it says Años 12, Vino Años, can't read it from here, but yeah, it's 12 years old, Amontillado, great little bottle of wine, beautiful color. Beautiful fucking brown color right there. Look at that. That's fucking brown, boys. All right. Last part. Wine law and wine business. Okay. And this isn't weird because there's a bunch of tiers of businesses here. All right. Types of businesses engaged in production. All wines must be matured and bottled in the 7,000 hectare region of the zone of production. Average holdings of grape growers is less than 3 hectares. So you got a lot of people, a little bit of land. Okay. 40% of all production is made by cooperatives, which is kind of typical for Europe, high cooperative production. And then big shippers, and we'll talk about shippers later, but big companies buy directly from small farmers, and basically every rung. Okay. Production is split into 3 business models. This is the last part. Stay here with me, guys. There's 3 business models. Okay. One is the first one is the production bodega. They just make the base wine. The middle one is called the aging and storing. They just age the wine and hold on to it. And then the last one is called aging and shipping, also known as a shipper. Those are the only people that can sell the wine. Okay. So we're going to start with the production bodega. Okay. These are bodegas tasked with the production of the base wine only. Okay. They press and ferment base wines. They legally have to be located in the zone of production. They can, weirdly enough, they can produce final wines. However, these wines are not approved for DO status. So they have to if they're making wine, it's the cheapest, shittiest wine that you can make. It's typically done by large cooperatives. And then it's often owned, this model, the production bodega, is often owned by big companies that own other tiers as well. So a company might own all 3 tiers and just do separate jobs in separate places. Okay. So, but that's the production bodega. The second one is aging and storing bodega. Okay. This is for maturation only. Okay. Must be located in the zona de producción. All they do is mature wines. They can be very small or they can be very large. However, this is the rung that's getting fucked the most because we'll get to that in a second, actually. But wines matured at this level must be sold to aging and shipping bodega. Okay. They cannot legally make their own wine, nor can they legally sell their own wine. They're just the middleman. They're just aging, and storing wine. Okay. And then the third level, the last one, is aging and shipping bodega. These are also called shippers. And this is the only tier registered or permitted to export and sell DO sherry or Manzanilla wines. Okay. This business must be located in the zone of production. But, okay, here's where it gets weird. These guys are legally able to mature wines, thus kind of making that whole middle tier obsolete. So you have a production bodega, and then you can just go straight to an aging and shipping bodega. There's really no reason to have that aging and storing bodega, and that is the fastest declining part of the business. They're just most companies are just skipping right past that. They're doing their own aging, and then they're the only people that are permitted to export and sell wine. So these guys can bottle their own wine, and then they can also do like separate bottlings or labelings with different brands that they bought from the aging and storage bodega. So you can make like Winezilla cellars, and then you can also make like, you can buy Robert Mondavi's aging and storage bodega and then say Winezilla of Robert Mondavi. It's kind of weird, but they can do separate labelings basically. Because of the redundancy of the aging and storing tier, this tier has been putting themselves out of business. Aging and storing tiers are attempting to switch to aging and shipping tiers. So the middle tier is trying, if they have the fucking money, they're trying to get that legislation for aging and shipping. I'm sure it's not easy, but the aging and storing bodega, the middle level, is getting totally assed out of the business. It's becoming obsolete. Okay. Two more things. The Consejo Regulador, established in 1933, the Consejo is responsible for maintaining all vineyard registers, setting max yield regulations and minimum alcohol levels for base wine. Okay. This is the governing body for the region. Okay. They oversee the rotation of Solera stocks. They verify the authenticity of age-indicated sherries, and they develop and regulate the DO for sherry and Manzanilla. Okay. Lastly, sherry sales. Okay. Sherry wines have been in gradual decline since 1979. The biggest decline showing in the sector for sweetened styles of wine. That's the cheap shit, cheap sweet wines. Okay. However, Fino has also tended to decline. Manzanilla has managed to stay relatively stable, mostly due to its popularity in the domestic market, which is currently the largest market for overall sherry consumption. So Spain drinks more sherry than anyone else. Premium examples of Palo Cortado, PX, and age-indicated sherries are by far the most profitable for companies. So just like Portugal, the expensive stuff is still good. It's still selling. It's the cheap stuff that's really starting to decline. And the higher end stuff is starting to be more favored by the producers themselves because they know they can get more money for it. So currently 1/3 of total sherry production takes place in its domestic market of Spain, favoring the drier style of Fino and Manzanilla, mostly to pair with its iconic tapas gastronomy. It's great stuff. If you ever go out there, spent about a week out there last year. It's great. The largest export market is currently the UK, which favors the sweeter styles. So a lot of sweet wine is getting shipped to the UK. Sweet ports, that makes sense. A lot of those port houses and sherry houses are owned by British people that are fucking colonizers. And finally, due to the decline of production, many producers are experimenting with unfortified styles of wine in the Andalusia region. Time will only tell. Maybe one day soon, us wine scholars will have a whole new region to study. But because of the decline of sherry, fortified wines, people are trying to make just normal ass style wine out of Palomino and PX and Moscatel. So good on them. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. That's a fucking wrap. It's been an hour of fucking recording and reading, so my brain hurts really bad. I'm going to go drink some sherry wine now. God bless you guys and good luck on your studies. That is Fortified Wines Sherry Level 1. We have Portugal, port wine. We've got Madeira. We've got more stuff, but that was the big one. So thank you guys. God bless you. Have a good night.